You have a limb preservation program at GW, and you've been doing this for 25 years.
We do. We are dedicated to saving limbs.
Tell me what those doctors in Boston were faced with through the hours of the night last night, assessing, can this limb be saved or not?
Well, as you mentioned, these are much like wartime injuries. Usually we deal with diabetics and people with atherosclerosis. That's not what these people were dealing with. So the first step is to save the patient's life, stabilize them, stop bleeding, and save their life. The second thing is to assess the limb to see if it can be saved. So they have to look at the amount of damage and then look at the bones and the arteries and the nerves to see if it can be saved.
Not only were we dealing with a blast here, we were dealing with shrapnel, bombs made to do the most damage possible. We heard about victims with severe nail injuries, ball bearings deeply embedded in soft tissue. How do you treat that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So this is something meant to hurt people. And what you have to do is, with these injuries, is primarily prevent infection. So after you save the limb, these people oftentimes require maybe another operation or antibiotics or other procedures to deal with infection that can occur from these metal objects, which are obviously not sterile.
You're a vascular guy, blood vessel guy. What role does that play in the recuperation of these folks?
Well, one of the major reasons that these people lose their limb, if it's not due to the loss of tissue, is the blood vessel injury and the lack of circulation. But nowadays, we've gotten techniques so good that we can almost always restore blood, and then people just have to undergo intensive rehabilitation.
And talking about that rehab, where can these people get back to with the state of prosthetics today with the rehabilitation technologies we have?
Well, the one glimmer of light in this whole situation are these were very motivated, young, athletic group of people. They will rehab well. With the state of prosthetics that we have now, if the limb can be saved, these folks should go on to be able to walk again and engage in daily activities.
Let's certainly hope so. Dr. Richard Neville, thanks for your insights.
My pleasure.
Can you patent a human gene? That's the question before the U.S. Supreme Court, even as women rallied outside saying their genes are being held hostage by a company with the patents for the BRCA1 and BRCA2 or BRCA genes. I was inside the High Court to hear oral arguments yesterday in a case which could have major implications on the future of medical research.
A human gene is, in fact, a piece of the human body. It's not an invention.
Attorney Christopher Hansen of the American Civil Liberties Union represented a big group of petitioners in this case who argue Myriad Genetics shouldn't have been able to patent its isolation of the BRCA genes and the testing for mutations. When the BRCA genes are mutated, it means women like Lisa Schlager inherit a much higher risk of breast and ovarian cancer.
The BRCA gene is a naturally occurring thing in the body.
Myriad has a monopoly on BRCA testing and made more than $400 million on it in its last fiscal year. Women can't get a second opinion from another company, and some say their insurance doesn't cover the cost of the test, which runs about $4,000. But inside the Supreme Court today, lawyers for Myriad argued that without the company's investment in research and their scientists, this specific gene sequence would never have been sliced out or recreated in the lab. Local attorney Michelle Wales, who wrote one of the briefs in support of the company, says this decision impacts the entire biotech industry.
If it is decided that DNA sequences are not patentable, it changes the rules. And potentially what that could mean is that we would have less medicines and less vaccines for patients.
In a company statement, Myriad also says most patients pay an average of just $100 in out-of-pocket expenses, and that more than 1 million have benefited from finding out their BRCA gene status. Lisa Schlager wants future generations, like her daughter, to have even more access to that information.
They're hindering progress for people who are at high risk of breast and ovarian cancer by keeping this information to themselves.
The Supreme Court justices asked a lot of tough questions of both sides in this gene patenting debate. They are expected to rule in the case this summer. For more in-depth analysis of this groundbreaking case, tune into BioCentury this week. That's Sunday at 8:30 a.m. right here on WUSA 9.
Now, Anita Brikman's here with me with more on the effects of ricin and why it can be so deadly.
Scary stuff, Derek. It really is. There is no antidote for ricin right now, so avoiding exposure is paramount. This is a poison found naturally in castor beans. It can be extracted during the processing. It can be turned into a powder, mist, or a pellet, and can be dissolved in water. Ricin has actually been tested as an experimental way to kill cancer cells, but it doesn't take a lot to kill a whole person. The symptoms depend on the way you're exposed, whether the poison has been inhaled or ingested. With inhalation, people have trouble breathing, fever, and cough Fluid can start building up in their lungs. With ingestion, vomiting and diarrhea are the first signs, but this poison then goes on to trigger seizures, eventually lead to organ failure. And the CDC says what doctors can basically do is supportive therapy. There's no cure for it. You just support the patient, you give them IV fluids, you help them breathe, put them on a respirator.
And hope they didn't take in enough to kill them.
That's exactly right. That's why they're taking this so seriously.
All right, Anita, thank you.